Yo, what's up, guys? So, we're going to be ranking every single ending from all of these Xenoblade games, including the DLC. Okay, I just recently kind of skimmed through them, watched them all again, and kind of just took some notes. And we're just going to be ranking every single Xenoblade game's ending and how well they just end the game and end the story for their respective like plots and just all of that. And really just go over, which were the best endings, because really all the endings in Xenoblade are very varied, and they also are very good in their own respective ways. Some less so. We'll get into that, but yeah, we're just going to be ranking all of them. I have my tiers here. Peak for the best ones, really great, pretty good, and then ruin the game, LOL. I doubt really any of them will end up in this tier, but we'll see. I would also rank the other Xeno games' endings, like Xenogears. I've beaten and I've seen the ending of that, but I haven't played Xenoblade X or the Xenosaga trilogy yet. I'm still kind of like near the middle or end of Xenosaga 1, so I can't really say for those games. But we're just going to be sticking with the main Xenoblade games here and ranking all of the endings. So yeah, and by the way, I just want to preface this by saying I am counting the endings as far as after the final boss. So for each game or each entry here, once you beat the final boss, the ending accounted for is all of the cutscenes that play after that initial final boss. So, for example, Xenoblade 1, the ending, in my opinion, is right after you beat Zanza, okay, that cutscene and on. So, just want to preface that. That is my criteria for the endings, and we're going to be ranking them all. So, let's just jump in. And we're going to be actually starting in chronological order with Xenoblade 1. And so, Xenoblade 1's ending is, it's very cool because obviously Xenoblade 1 was made in a context of not necessarily trying to, make this whole franchise, make this whole trilogy, at least to my knowledge. I don't believe Xenoblade 2 or 3 was really that planned at this point of Xenoblade. Maybe Takahashi had a plan for 2 and 3 at this point, but as far as we know, this was a standalone game for much of its development, or was at least considered as such. And so this ending in many ways is just an ending for what it was. It doesn't really have much leeway into other of the entries as much. It's not as obvious. It's much more standalone, and so that's really my first pro of Xenoblade 1's ending, in that it's a very satisfying ending for its own story. So for the plot that's set up at the beginning of this game, it does it well, and it concludes it in a very satisfying way to where you could walk away and think, yeah, like all my questions were answered. I feel emotionally satisfied and resonant with what I was given, so thus, it's satisfying, right? And another good thing I feel with the Xenoblade 1's ending is that the scene pacing here, of like the just pure cinema of it, is good, right? Like, you're gonna actually be seeing, at least what I think of the endings after this. A lot of the endings of some of the other entries after this tend to have like weird whack pacing of the actual scenes, but it's not really the case with Xenoblade 1's. I suppose there is a bit of tonal whiplash with the whole Zanza final encounter, and then it suddenly cutting to the end with Fiora's perspective, having, retrieved her human body again. It was a bit sudden, but overall I felt the ending was conclusive enough and had a good like cinematic direction to where like you could watch the ending and be like, okay, that was like consistent, it made sense, and overall was like a good product. But as far as the ending goes, the scene pacing is very good. It also has a great ending song in of Beyond the Sky. Beyond the Sky is still one of the best vocal songs in the series, and while Beyond the Sky doesn't really have as much deep lyrics, or at least like more meaning into the lyrics that are relevant to the story as much as the other games do with their ending themes, Beyond the Sky is still like a really beautiful song. It really fits the scene at the end of 1 here. And yeah, just 1's ending is very good, and it also is just really good because it leaves basically no loose ends. What was set up from the very beginning of this game, most of the questions that any player would have are usually and mostly answered by this ending. It leaves no loose ends, it's very satisfying and conclusive, and really the franchise could have just ended here. Now here are the cons, I believe, with this ending. And you could think of some of these things as good and or bad, but I listed them as cons because we are looking at these endings from a universal and like broad perspective. So we're looking at this ending in the context of the other games. And as such, I feel one of the cons with this ending is it has little connection or leeway into the rest of the series. So this is understandable because maybe they didn't have the other games exactly planned by this point. This was meant to be a standalone again. But really, I feel in retrospect, Xenoblade 1 and really its ending doesn't have much leeway into the other games. It doesn't really set up the other ones or give too much room for them to basically exist. And the only way that was possible was to literally make like a multiverse or like a parallel timeline with two. So it was kind of weird, but you know, it's not a huge problem. But it is a con. I do consider it as such. I also feel the final climax itself against Zanza was awkwardly paced again because I feel that the scene was a bit short. Like they just beat him, and then it cuts to just Alvis, you know, lecturing Shulk about how he's God now and blah blah blah. And it was just a little short, I feel, a little anticlimactic. A lot of the ending and build-up to Xenoblade 1's ending was really just kind of stalling, like just shit had to happen. Like Zanza just had to be defeated and then we could get the ending that we got. You know, just things kind of just had to happen. It was a little anticlimactic. The true climax of this game, honestly, was Mikana's core, but despite that, I consider that a con. The pacing was a bit weird in the final climax against Zanza, and also the Alvis reveal was somewhat ham-fisted. Now you could consider this the leeway into the other games, having Alvis being part of the Trinity processor, but at this point there was no Trinity processor, so thus there really wasn't like anything to grapple. It was just this idea of him being this AI computer that basically made the entire world, which is a simulation, and just that whole reveal kind of came out of nowhere. It was just it was very ham-fisted. And really, those are just my only cons. They're not huge or anything, but I really do feel like most of the issues that stem from Xenoblade 1's ending is just the weak connection to the other games, in my opinion, and just the final fight against Zanza being a little weird in terms of its like pacing. But overall, Xenoblade 1's ending is pretty darn excellent. I would rank it in really great. I don't think it's peak necessarily. I think it's a very solid ending for a very, very solid game that's very straightforward, and it does its job. So yeah, I can't really complain too much, but it is really great. Alright, next we're going to actually get into Future Connected real quick. So, Future Connected, very short, short and sweet, and I think that's the same thing with its ending here. I think that's a good thing about it. That's one of the pros. It's just short. It doesn't really meander too much. Most of it isn't voice acted, but just seeing the characters from 1 in the future and where they kind of end up, at least like just when they are talking in that one scene, it's cool to see. And really just this ending is a nice way to end Melia's character arc in general, and I think that's the best thing about it. Future Connected, I feel, is just it's better to look at it as like a Melia character piece as opposed to, you know, an actual epilogue to the entirety of 1. And it's really just a Melia story at the end of the day. And as a result, also, it was just a really good conclusion between her and Tyrea. And, you know, it was just satisfying, you know. And while most of the scene and the ending wasn't voiced, it still communicated that quite well. And, yeah, it was nice. Now, I do have a few issues with this ending, but they're really just more broad problems with Future Connected as a whole because it is just so short. I feel the Fog King's defeat had, like, awkward pacing. Even more so than Zanza. Like, they defeat him, engage the enemy is like still blasting, and then it just kind of cuts to the ending montage, and it was just very awkward and melodramatic, if I might add. So that's definitely a big con. I also think the other characters besides Melia here in the ending are shafted, so we don't really get a definitive conclusion to characters like Shulk or even Nene or Kino, or even any of the other characters from base game 1. We just get like quick shots of them in the one scene. It's really just a Melia-centric ending, and the other characters aren't focused on, which is a shame. But you know, it's a bit disappointing that way, but if you like Melia, then it's not. And then lastly, I just think not enough happened in this ending to justify this entry, because the Fog King just wasn't explained. None of that like was explained or what they are necessarily. And the point of this DLC, at least in theory, was to set up 3. in the context of the ending of 1, but this game, or at least this DLC, didn't really do enough to set up 3, and the Fog Kings, or rather the Fog Beasts being like a remnant of that, didn't really do much, and it just kind of left more questions than answered, and maybe that was intentional, but it really, even considering Xenoblade 3, the fog didn't really do much there, and we still don't really have definitive answers to that. So, you know, it's just weird. I feel like just not enough happened, not only in the ending, but this just DLC in general. It would have benefited from being less Melia-centric in my opinion, but whatever. Okay, so I'm gonna place Future Connected's ending. I think it's fine for what it is for a rather underwhelming expansion. I'll put it in pretty good because, again, it does do the Melia-centric arc very well, and it concludes that very well. And I think for a rather disappointing DLC or disappointing epilogue, it ends in a satisfying way. At least it's pretty good. Alright, so we're going to jump into the Xenoblade 2 here. Let me drink some water. Alright, Xenoblade 2's ending. Now, Xenoblade 2's ending is really something, man. It is just insane. I feel like Xenoblade 2, one of the best things I can say about it and its ending is arguably has the best emotional peak of the series. This ending just is absolutely devastating, and you know, just the emotions of the characters, for every character really, is just at its apex, and you really get to see that not only through Rex and Pyra and her sacrifice, but really through the other characters. Just like their little lines that they say at the end really shows their psychology having developed throughout the entire game and showing the results of that. And really, I feel like this is the most emotional ending of the entire series, maybe barring Torna. And it is truly the emotional apex of this franchise, I feel, the ending of 2. And so that is a great pro that it has going for it. Another really good thing about Xenoblade 2's ending is that I believe it actually has the best scene-to-scene pacing of any of the endings, right? So again, we were accounting for the scenes that take place right after you beat Malos, okay? So starting with the final blow against him as Rex and Numa lay it, and then to the end where, you know, they're flying on Azurda towards the New World. The entire sequence, this entire 22-minute or so segment, it's like an anime episode. And the scenes flow very, very well, okay? It is very, very good. And so it is very, it is very well executed in how it is paced, okay? And I know some people don't like 2 or whatever, but the pacing, you cannot argue. The scene pacing here is by far the best of any of the endings. And that goes into the music too, and how the music composition is some of the best in the series. It's some of Mitsuda's best work, and also just, again, with the pacing, the sequencing of the music, and the choices of the music that they chose to make this ending really elevated it to the next level, I feel. Like having Parting play during that one scene, and then it transitioned to the Tomorrow with You so seamlessly. It is so good, you know, and then having Escape going through clouds afterwards, and then Elysium. The sound and the music choices and how they sequence them are by far the best in the franchise in terms of the endings. Also, the climax against Malos is one of the best in the franchise, I feel, as far as climaxes go. And really another great thing I can say about 2's ending is that this ending kept the fandom engaged all the way until the release of 3. Okay, so you had to be there, but if you were there, you know, this ending, it was controversial and loved, but for many reasons for both. But really, this ending, it had so much to it that it kept fans, and even people who didn't even really like the game, it kept people still talking about the game, even to this day, past 3. I honestly still see more people talk about 2's ending more than 3's, even though 3 is the newer entry. It is that insane. So yeah, I mean, that is definitely a testament to how much impact Xenoblade 2's ending had. So that's what I have for the pros. As far as cons go, and there are a few, I would say there are some confusing plot points and unexplained things, right? So you had the whole thing with Pyra and Mithra coming back at the very end. Now you could string together a reason as to how that happened. Maybe that was Klaus's final gift to Rex. But really, it doesn't make any concrete sense, and there's no explicit reason given, right? So there's like things like that, just like weird things, or how Azerto was able to turn into his dragon form, and just small stuff, little weird inconsistencies. There are reasons out there that you could look for, and people give, and they make sense. But as far as like the experience of just some casual player going through the ending and playing through this, and these things are happening, I can imagine how people could be confused and be a little unsure of what is going on. And lastly, another con I have with 2's ending is that there's just a lot of like ambiguous things about it. Like, we don't know how the rest of the world, like all rest, recovered from this whole ordeal. It mainly just focuses on the main cast. So a lot of the things that you may have been wondering about, it kind of just disregards it and focuses solely on the characters and their emotional state at the ending, because it just kind of focuses on Rex and the gang, on Azerta, and not any of like Araya or Gormott, and see how they're adapting to the new world or any of that. It doesn't give you that like Xenoblade 1, so that could be seen as a con. And also just another small thing, it's just like some characters and some of their lines, you just don't hear them. Like, they just cut out the audio, and it's supposed to be ambiguous. And there's just a bit too much ambiguity with the ending, I feel, but it still is like the emotional apex of the series, so, it is still great for that reason. So despite its few flaws, I do think Xenoblade 2's ending is peak, and it's still one of the best, if not the best, ending in the Blade franchise, at least. Alright, now we have Torna. Now, Torna's crazy. Now, if base game Xenoblade 2's ending was the most emotionally impacting, I would say Torna's ending is probably the most emotionally devastating ending, by far. And that is a huge pro. This is probably the most different ending compared to any of the other endings in this franchise, because it just ends on such a sad note. And that's just really fantastic. And one thing about it too is, like, it's going to end this way. Many of these characters die, and where Jin ends up, and where, all Mithra ends up. Where all of these characters end up, yet you still see it coming, yet it still impacts you at the highest level. And so just for that, the execution of the devastating circumstances of the world and the characters here too, is absolutely superb. And another great thing with Torna's ending, especially compared to base game 2's, is that not only does it focus on the emotional state of the characters just as much as base game 2, but it also literally shows you the world, like how other people are handling this, how Adam is handling it, how Laura handled it, how Jin handled it, how the Aegis handled it, how Hugo handled it, or lack thereof, because he literally died. And, the people of Torna, literally Torna being sunk. Stuff like that. You get to see everyone be affected by this huge Aegis war, and it was crazy, and that's just a huge pro. Another huge pro about Torna's ending, I feel, was the story build-up to the ending is the best in the series. So again, like, what's going to happen, yet it still impacts you, and it just shows how good the build-up was to this ending. It was stellar. I also think Torna, specifically its ending, had some of the best VA work in the franchise. Now, I know a lot of people dog on the voice work of some Xenoblade games, especially 2, base game 2, but Torna, they redeemed themselves. Like, the performances of some of these voice actors, they absolutely nailed it. Malice in particular, David Mencken has always been one of the best actors in this franchise, but really Torna might be his best work. It's him at his apex. So yeah, it has some of the best VA work. There's that too. And some of the dialogue too, and the lines are some of the best in the series as well. I think a lot of the writing here is some of the entire franchise's peak, even going across all of Xeno. Like, Jin's monologue at the end of the game is so well written and so poignant and so good. Like, that alone, it just elevates this to the next level, because even though all this crazy stuff is happening, the emotional state of the characters is crazy, the actual execution of what the characters are saying and their dialogue, they absolutely nailed it. And another great thing about Torna in general and its ending is that it just retroactively makes 2 better. It makes 2 like more cohesive and has more context as a result of Torna's ending, and it's really fantastic for that. And really, Torna as a whole and its ending, really served as making Xenoblade 2 Takahashi's most complete work in a way, because you have base game 2, but then you have Torna being the context for everything that happens in 2. And so it just makes for his most like cohesive and well-rounded product, you know? And so, yeah, Torna's ending especially really serves that. Now, Torna's ending really has like no cons except one thing, and it's really debatable, because I actually think this was intended, but the one con I do have with Torna's ending is that I do feel the semi-anticlimactic ending with Gort was a bit underwhelming and anticlimactic. So obviously Torna sinks, the whole climax happens, Malus is presumably defeated, at least for now, but then at the end it shows another fight with Laura, Hayes, and Jin up against Gort, who comes back, who was defeated way earlier in the expansion, and it was very anticlimactic because technically Gort is the final boss of Torna. However, it really just showed, like, at the end of the day, the true villain is not a Malus or these blades or any of this. It's really just humans at the end of the day and our attitude, you know, and Gort solidified that idea, and it shows, especially in the scene afterwards, how despite Malus being gone, there will always be, you know, strife in the world because humans still exist. So, you know, I guess that could be considered a con for this ending, but overall I think it's intended, and just really Torna's ending was fantastic. That's really all the cons I have for it. I think this ending is clearly elevated to peak, probably even above base game 2 somehow, because 2 not only was a great ending, but Torna was not only a fantastic and devastating ending emotionally on its own, but it elevated the base game even higher too. So the fact that it has that retroactive element, I think solidifies it, at least so far, as the best ending in the series. Alright, let's tackle Xenoblade 3. Okay. Now, I would say the general broad opinion of Xenoblade 3's ending isn't exactly the most positive. It tends to lean on the more controversial side of things, and some people don't even like it, and some people do, with caveats. I tend to fall in that group. I think the ending is good in a way, and good for what it is, but I think there's issues. But what are the pros of 3's ending? Because there are some. I think 3 had a great thematic payoff, and the overall philosophy and the messaging of what Takahashi was trying to communicate to the player was well delivered and well executed, I think. You know, not living in the now eternally and not being stagnant in the present is a good message, and I feel it was very clearly, almost too clearly, communicated to the player, and I would say it was overall it was well done. Also, the actual goodbye scene between Ouroboros here was really touching. It was very good. It was very well executed, especially the running scene as the worlds are drifting apart. Very poignant and very nice. I really liked that. And technically speaking, overall, the ending is well written. Like, from a baseline script perspective, you know, having Noah and everyone else defeat Zed, and then having the world kind of basically just being reset with Origin reverting back, and then, you know, the world splitting. Like, technically speaking, from a technical perspective, the ending makes sense and is good. Like, the worlds merging back to, you know, or demerging, I should say, demerging back to how they were, like, it makes sense from, like, a logical perspective, right? But this is actually where we get into the cons, and unfortunately I do have many cons and issues with Xenoblade 3's ending. So the first con I do have in this rather prolonged list, I think the scene pacing was very bad, pretty darn bad in Xenoblade 3's ending. And just a mere example of this would be the sudden use of Where We Belong, so that's the ending theme. Great song, by the way, great vocal performance, good song, good ending theme. But I feel the sudden, like, use of that song, where it was used, it broke the kind of emotional quietness this, like, the scene pacing was going for. The scene before was very quiet, there was no music, it was just ambient, and then it cuts to Noah and Mio, and then suddenly Where We Belong is playing. It felt too quick, it felt too fast, and it didn't feel right in the moment. it didn't match the tone, and I feel like the song was playing too early, and so I think that was huge. That's a huge problem because you want to nail the music sequencing in these scenes, and it just wasn't quite there. And that's not to say the music is bad. Like the music before this, like Something's Beginning to Move, a fantastic song, but in scenes like this, Where We Belong just didn't fit there, I believe. Another issue I have with this game's ending is I feel Zed's death and N and M's sacrifice scene were out of left field, and they're contrived in execution just to serve the theming, and really just a common theme with Xenoblade 3 in general is that it sacrifices a lot like of logic and just general practicality just to hammer home the being in the present eternally is bad message. And I feel like Zed's death and how he died at the hands of N and M's sacrifice was out of left field. Suddenly they're just good, especially N, like he was a psychopath the whole game, and he's suddenly, you know, wanting to move on and wanting Noah and Mio to, you know, carry the torch. It just didn't make a lot of emotional or logical sense, and it made sense thematically, but at the cost of it making sense at a baseline practical level. So there was that, I guess, and really just this whole ending was just way too ambiguous, I feel, and there was many important details about how things work that were just left out or just not even extrapolated on, like how origin works, or, you know, why N and M exist at all, and things like that. And I feel that is pretty huge. You want your story to make sense, especially its ending, so you actually stick the landing, and it didn't really do that. Another huge issue I have with this game's ending is that I feel it half-assed its connections to 1 and 2. It like didn't do enough, but also it did too much. So for example, Rex's harem picture in the ending with Poppy coming out of the thing and seeing Nia, the picture that they show, right, it broke the tension. Them showing Rex's harem picture there, it kind of like stole attention away from the actual ending of Ouroboros and them saying goodbye, and it just shouldn't have been placed there. I feel having that whole spiel with even the Monado and Melia, and then the fan service thing with Rex and the picture, that should have been placed in the middle of the game instead of the ending, and I feel that really took away from the, you know, climax and the emotional climax of Noah and Mio here, and it even further ruined the pacing, I feel, of this ending. And it just had bad scene splitting too. Like conveniently, Poppy is coming out of her little chamber thing as Melia is looking at the Monado, and then she's of course seeing Nia again, and then conveniently there's a table right next to them in the same shot, so that way they can show a picture of Rex and the family. And even though you can never find that picture anywhere else, it was just so contrived just to show fan service, and it didn't even do enough either. It was just like the worst way to do the fan service, and that stuff should have been placed near the middle of the game, maybe in the city. Maybe you can find that Rex picture somewhere, or maybe it's even, you know, covered in a scene, but it shouldn't have been at the very ending of the trilogy where it's actually ending the game of Noah and Mio and their story, instead of like shoehorning these fan servicey things. And don't get me wrong, I like fan service, but this wasn't the right way to execute it. Like, you gave us what we wanted, but not in the correct way, and at the cost of the story of this game. So it just was like the worst way to do it. And lastly, the last con, I promise this is the last one for Xenoblade 3's ending, but while technically this ending makes sense, like, or rather it's well written, like, it makes sense Noah and Mio would split up at the end, you know, emotionally, logically, it's like a good, well-written ending, at least in theory. I feel the ending feels too cookie cutter. I feel that the ending feels too cookie cutter in execution. So for example, Noah only says goodbye to Mio at the ending, Lance only says goodbye to Senna in the ending, and Tyon only says goodbye to Uni in the ending. All of these characters only say goodbye to their Ouroboros counterpart, when at the end of the day they were all a group. So it just feels too like structured, it feels too like thought out almost, and it kind of just seemed like Takahashi just wanted to get the game and writing the story over with. Like, I don't know why we didn't get scenes of Lance and Tyon saying goodbye, you know, because they had like a dynamic kind of, or Uni and Senna, or Mio with Uni, or Noah with Tyon. We didn't get any of that. We didn't get any of that. And so it was just all delegated to each other's counterpart. Even Riku and Manana, like, they only say goodbye to each other, no one else. It's just very, very structured and contrived in execution, very cookie cutter. And then also like having Agnes, Kevis, and all the city members conveniently all being in one group each. You know, they're not talking to each other, they're all like standing there posing. It's just so like, so conveniently contrived, and it's just so structured, and it just comes off as very like cookie cutter and not well thought out. Like, they thought of the ending and then they didn't put much more thought into it. They just thought of like the general ideas. So yeah, that's where it ends. And then also one more thing, and then the world's splitting, like literally the ground is being pulled away from each other. It's just so cookie cutter and cheesy, and some might say in a good way, but I don't know, I'm not a fan. So that's all I have to say about 3's ending, and unfortunately that does put it in the lower end of the spectrum here. I'm not going to put it at ruin the game, because, you know, I don't think it did. It's just a weak ending, I feel, in all aspects. I still do love Xenoblade 3. I love a lot of things about it, and I think it does a lot of things great. But as far as the ending goes, I do tend to agree with the unanimous opinion online, in that it is one of the weaker endings of the series, you know, and it's pretty I don't think it's bad. I think it does some things well, but it's just too fast, weird scene pacing, cookie cutter in aspects, too ambiguous. It doesn't answer enough questions, and I feel it fumbles the fan service. So, with that being said, we have one more ending to cover, and that would be Xenoblade 3 Future Redeems ending, okay? Now, this expansion in general was just very anticipated, because 3's ending, at least to a lot of people, again, fumbled the bag. So Future Redeemed really had to nail it, and so we'll see. Here's some of the pros I have with Future Redeemed's ending, okay? I think it has the best spectacle and final climax in the franchise. So, you know, having everyone fight against Alpha here was just probably like the coolest fucking thing in the whole series. Seeing everyone come together, like Rex, Shulk, A, and Matthew, and everyone else, having them come together to beat Alpha, which was essentially what used to be Alvis, was such a cool scene, and it was just really epic, you know? So it has that going for it. It also has a great message and theming, I feel, with Future Redeemed. One of the most interesting things, I feel, is that even though base game 3 had that message of, oh, don't be stagnant, or don't be living in the present forever, Future Redeemed does still kind of purport that, but it also kind of contradicts that in a way, because it also tells you, hey, don't do that, but also, when you move into the future, don't do it too quickly, and that's kind of represented by Alpha in a way, trying to force in the future, too. So, you know, it is cool in that way, and also it's interesting because at the end of the game, with the blue light coming towards Earth, people theorize that that may be Cosmos, and Cosmos is from a past Xeno project being Xenosaga. So if Xenoblade is being connected to Xenosaga here with that onset of Cosmos, it shows that Takahashi in a way is not staying stagnant. He is moving into the future, but not too quickly, while also bringing back past projects, as in Xenosaga, to be like integrated into his new work. So that's very interesting that he's integrating like all aspects of time into what he's doing now. So I think this DLC shows, like, in a weird way, Takahashi's psychology and Takahashi's outlook on what he wants to do in the future. So overall, I think the messaging and the theming was really good. And also Future Redeemed's ending made Xenoblade 3 especially, but 2 and 1's endings all retroactively better. So it has that same effect as Torna, where just because it includes Rex, just because it includes Shulk, just because it includes Matthew, and just because it includes A, all of those characters, it retroactively makes all of the other games' endings better, you know? Like seeing Shulk where he is now, like having kind of being jaded a little bit, after being such a hopeful character in base game 1, and now he's kind of delegated more to this mentor figure. It's really cool, and him seeing, you know, old friend, at least in a way, in Alvis in the form of A, was great. And then having Rex still maintaining that same hopeful, in a way, but like optimistic outlook on life, and seeing how he still maintains that viewpoint until the very end, and how he passes down his responsibility and will to his children, just like how he said to Jin at the end of 2, It was a great way to round out his character. And I really loved as well how Shulk and Rex handing down their roles as heroes to the next generation. That entire scene is probably one of the best scenes in the series. Seeing these old characters, seeing them like aged up at this point, and then handing down literally their heroism and their will to their incarnations or their children in a way. It's a really good scene. It's in a way Takahashi like moving on in a way. And so it's really cool. I also think the ending improved N specifically really well. Him kind of turning into an anti-hero to defeat Alpha was kind of neat, even though he was just trying to, you know, protect the Endless now. So, but yeah, just really good work and character work on N here, and improving him even further. And also the fantastic ending song in Future Awaits was fantastic. Really well sung, really well orchestrated, and probably one of the best vocal songs in the entire franchise. And really, in general, this was just a perfect ending to the entire trilogy. I think it's less of a good ending to 3. I really just think Future Redeemed and its ending was just like more so a cap off to the entire Blade saga, more so than it capping off 3. And that's understandable, you know? And I really loved how the ending kind of communicated that, you know, things will get better, things will get good again. But it will just take time, and you know it did, because you know Xenoblade 3 happened. So yeah, Future Redeemed's ending was really good. And then for the cons that I have for it, it's really only one. I just feel that some things again were still left somewhat ambiguous, though not as bad as base game 3. And there were a couple loose ends, but nothing crazy. And as in loose ends, I mean stuff like, you know, did the characters meet each other again with the worlds colliding? But we think they did, because you know, they merge again in the final cutscene, so it's congruent with the ending of base game 3. It's very weird how they executed this, but there's stuff like that. And then maybe just some other questions about like how Origin works, and you know, if Rex and Shulk are really in there the whole time in base game 3, you know, just cheering our characters on to eventually free them in the world, you know, it's stuff like that. But, and also maybe like the nature of A. But other than that, overall, I thought it stuck the landing, and overall was a very satisfying conclusion, not only for 3, but it was a satisfying conclusion to the overall arc and overall ideas of not only the Xenoblade saga, but the entire Xeno franchise. And so for that alone, I think Future Redeemed alone is definitely in the peak territory. I think it has great aspects to it, few flaws, but you know, it's definitely up there. As far as where it ranks, I'd probably put it here. I probably think Torna has the best ending still, but but for what Future Redeemed did for the overall series, cannot be understated. So I'd probably put it there. It might be interchangeable with Torna, but you know, I just think Torna just did so much for the base game of 2. So yeah, that's my tier list of all of the endings here. I guess let's just rank Xenogears for like no reason. It's the only other Xeno game that I finished as of now. I'd probably put it like right here, the ending. I don't know. Alright guys, so that was my thoughts on all of the endings of every Xenoblade game, including for Xenogears for no reason. And let me know what you think of the endings, you know, which one you think is the best, which one you think is the worst. Do you agree that Xenoblade 3 is that low? Do you think, you know, a different Xenoblade game has a better ending? Do you think Future Connected has the best ending? I don't know. So, let me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.